In this presentation, we're going to discuss strategies to help you manage challenging or difficult students in the online classroom. One of the challenges when working in the online classroom is that students have become very comfortable interacting online. They instant message, they use public chat boards, they text, they post on Facebook. They're so comfortable, in fact, that they've started to develop a lot of online interaction habits. And when they get to a point in the course that they maybe are frustrated, they're going to rely on these interaction habits. And in many cases, post messages that are rude or obnoxious or disruptive, things that a face-to-face student would never do. As an instructor, we need to acknowledge that in many cases, students are not trying to be obnoxious. They're not trying to be difficult. They're not trying to be rude, but rather they're frustrated. And when they become frustrated, they're going to revert back and rely on some of these interaction habits that are typically not seen as appropriate in an academic setting. When you're working with these students, then, you need to think about the fact that you have to deal with each individual student while simultaneously managing your overall classroom environment. In the online classroom, all interactions are visible. So when a student posts something on a threaded discussion and you reply to it, it's not just you and that student. It's the entire class. So however you respond to difficult students, it's going to start to set the tone for that overall classroom environment. So you need to figure out a balance. How do I deal with this challenging student while simultaneously creating a positive learning environment for all other students involved? If you've taught online, you've likely run across some difficult students. And if you haven't ran across these students, I will almost guarantee that you will. Maybe not all of them, but one or two. Let's talk about each of these difficult types and discuss some strategies that you might use to more effectively deal with them when it happens in your online classroom. The first one we're going to discuss is the know-it-all. This is the student that wants to answer questions for you, and they want to argue with you, and they want to contradict anything you have to say. The best way to deal with a know-it-all is to recognize that they're trying to impress you. Generally, the know-it-all doesn't want to be obnoxious. They probably don't even recognize that they are. Rather, they think they're showing you how smart they are. They're showing you that they understand the content and that they have a sophisticated knowledge. They don't realize how annoying that this can be. So when responding to the know-it-all student, remember, they're trying to impress you and keep your response on the course content. For example, if they're answering for you, you can simply acknowledge that they're correct, but that you also have professional experience. If they're contradicting you, go ahead and keep it on the content. Tell them, yes, there are disagreements in the field. This is the case in many disciplines. But for this course, we're going to keep our focus on this theory or this principle and use it as our guiding theory. Notice that these responses remove any kind of an emotional reaction to the student. It doesn't tell the student, do not contradict me, but rather reestablishes that you are the one that will set the tone for the course and that you also have relevant professional experience. The other key for the know-it-all student is that you don't want to completely shut them down, because in many cases they will have expertise that's valuable for your class. So finding ways to interact that allows them to share their expertise without trying to take over or control the class. Another type of difficult student is that of the mutineer. This student tends to complain a lot, and usually it's very vocal and it's very open, and it's almost always in some sort of a public forum. Not only do they want to complain, but they want to encourage others to complain as well. The greatest challenge with the mutineer student is that they can change the tone of the class. And so you need to be sure that you nip this in the bud early so that the class as a whole doesn't start to develop a negative attitude, but that you also do it in a fashion that's respectful to the student and shows students that you still care about their concerns. Responding to them, you're going to want to keep your emphasis on course policies and procedures. So if they're really complaining a lot in public forums, simply tell them, if you have issues, please email or call me so that we can discuss your concerns. If they're trying to get others to complain, again, redirect the public discussions back to the course content, and encourage them to get a hold of you in private. Notice that you haven't responded to their concerns, because you don't want to turn all of your course into a fight about what the policies and the procedures are. At the same time, you do want to encourage students, if they have concerns, to contact you. So keeping the focus on private communications to discuss concerns, public forums for course content. Another difficult student type is the must-have an A student. This student is very concerned about their grade, which is good, but they're concerned about their grade more than they are about actually learning the content of your course. Oftentimes, this student will come to you and tell you, I'm an A student, I get all A's, I'm a 4.0, or they'll complain about your course, comparing it to other courses in which they were able to get an A. The key here is to focus on current performance. Going back and discussing with the student that yes, this course can be challenging, but that you are there as a resource to help them succeed and to help them meet the guidelines and expectations so that they can also get an A in your course. If they're dissatisfied with their grade, this might be the student that tells you, I got an A in English and so I should have got an A on that paper I just wrote for you. You can just say, this grade is not a reflection of your overall competence, rather it's specific to this assignment. Please see the assignment directions or rubrics for detailed grading guidelines, or look at the feedback that I gave you for suggestions on how you might improve so that you can get an A next time. This is a good student to have in that they're very invested in the course. The challenge is you need to work with them to understand that the grade is not the only focus. It's obviously important, but that the learning should be reflective of the grade that they received. One of the types of difficult students that we often don't think of as a difficult student is that of the quiet student. The quiet student is usually current with their assignments, they do what's asked of them, they log in regularly, but they rarely actually participate. They more lurk and they hang out in the background and they read what others are writing, but they don't actually contribute themselves. In many cases, the quiet student is not confident that they have anything worthwhile to share. And as such, they kind of just wait to see what other people have to say. The key here is going to be to give them some individual attention. If they haven't posted, you might actually list their name and ask them specifically what they think about the theory. Or if you don't want to call them out individually, you can tell people, class, I'd like all of you to share. We can all learn more by sharing. And at that point, when they share, perhaps take a little more time and attention to respond to their comments so that they can gain the confidence to keep actively participating in the course. Another difficult student is that of the controller. The controller is invested in the course, but they want to do the course on their schedule. They want all the assignments in advance, they want to have the first and last word. In essence, they want to run the show and they want to tell you how the course should be run. The key here is to focus on the schedule of the course and get the student to understand that the schedule is not random, but that the schedule is a function of their learning in the course. So you might want to tell the students, the course learning is cumulative, and I'll give you the assignments when you have the necessary knowledge to complete them. And telling them, I really appreciate your enthusiasm, but we're all going to follow the course policy. These students are invested, so we don't want to drive them away from the course, but at the same time, we want them to learn at the same pace and schedule so that they can take advantage of the learning gains available through the threaded discussions and of the feedback on one assignment so that it can help improve the assignments in the future. Another difficult student is that of the staller. The staller is chronically late. They delay logging into the course, they turn in assignments late, they'll get behind, they're always trying to catch up, and they're always giving you excuses as to why they need an exception to the rule. The challenge here is that the staller can dig themselves into a hole that they can't get back out of, that they can get so far behind that it's not possible for them to learn the material or to effectively catch up in the course. The emphasis here is really to talk about the course policy and why the course policy is essential for ensuring that they can adequately learn the material in the course. When people get behind, they start to get confused and then they start to get frustrated. So when they start to get confused, they'll post things like, this doesn't make any sense, I don't understand how to do this. and you can tell by their posts they're getting frustrated. Rather than responding to that frustration, point them back to the necessary content in the course. And it's okay to say this relies on a cumulative understanding. As mentioned previously, you need to look at whatever. On the other hand, you don't want to tell students directly, if you would have been here last week, this would make sense to you. They know that. They're just frustrated. And by you calling them out, they're going to get even more frustrated. But focusing them on the necessary resources, reminding them of the value of keeping up to date and why the course policies are there to allow them to stay on track. The staller, more than anyone else, is likely to get frustrated and become angry at you because you won't give them exceptions. Keep in mind, it's not necessarily directed at you. They're frustrated with themselves. They're frustrated because they're behind. Unfortunately, you're going to become the target of that frustration. So removing the emotional reaction and responding to the content is going to be essential to keeping this student satisfied in your course. Also keep in mind that there will be times when it's appropriate to make exceptions for students, and these students would not necessarily be seen as stallers. The staller is the one who is chronically unable to turn in their assignments on any kind of a deadline. And this is quite different from the student that may have a justifiable and reasonable reason for needing a one-time extension or a one-time exception to the policy. What I think is the most difficult student to deal with is that of the noisy student. And the reason it's the most difficult is because they are enthusiastic in the course. They are posting a lot. They are actively involved. But unfortunately, it's not on topic. This student believes that simply by being there and by actively participating, they're going to get a good grade. So they post a lot of comments, they have a lot of things going on, but it may or may not help the direction of the discussions. And the challenge here is, if they get the entire class off on a tangent, it becomes very difficult to refocus an entire class of students once everybody has gone astray. So with the noisy student, you want to very early on redirect back to the key issues of the course. So if they're giving comments that are really irrelevant, simply acknowledge that's interesting, but for now let's keep on topic. Or asking them to come back and really clearly address the original question that has been posed. If they're not including the academic comment, acknowledge that it's interesting, but ask them to make that connection. In all cases with the noisy student, you'll notice that the idea is redirecting back without discouraging their interaction. We still want them to interact a lot. We just want to make sure the interactions are relevant and are focused on the key issues at hand. When you're dealing with difficult students, there's really a two-pronged approach. One, you need to give them some individual attention and take concerns that you have privately with them. You don't want to deal with a difficult student or a sensitive topic in a public forum. On the other hand, you don't want to completely ignore the issue in the public forum because other students can see what's happening and you need to set the tone for the entire class. So it's always a good approach to think, I'm going to publicly redirect them with a non-emotional response, and I'm going to ask them to take private concerns to email or phone, but I'm going to establish a non-emotional, factual response for everyone in the class to see. And then you're going to, within a private avenue, discuss more thoroughly your concerns with what's going on. Anytime they're being verbally abusive, threatening, or anything that crosses student conduct code policies or school policies, you're going to want to document every interaction and report that to the necessary authorities. But generally speaking, you're going to be able to address the difficult students by talking to them in some sort of a private forum and maintaining a public redirect so that the entire class knows how they should handle the situation. When you're interacting with them and communicating with them, it's important that you use a formal tone, partially because in the online environment they don't pick up on nonverbal cues. And so really clearly and firmly telling them what your expectations are or how they should interact is going to let them know that it's serious and that you're not joking and that this is an expectation for the course. The greatest challenge you're going to have is to avoid an emotional reaction. When a student attacks you or tells you you're unfair or starts to attack you as an instructor, you're naturally going to be upset. Refrain from responding when you're upset. you're not going to be able to take that emotional response back. So you need to make sure that when you interact with them, it's professional, it's non-emotional, and that you haven't got drawn into this like argument or defense of yourself. You don't need to defend yourself, you just need to state the policies and let that go. If the student gets you drawn into this kind of a back and forth defensive battle, you're going to lose the focus of the course. The student is going to become frustrated, you're going to become frustrated, and it's going to change the tone of the entire course. So when in doubt, write your response, and if necessary, wait a few hours to send it. Come back and read it later and decide, is this appropriate? Is this non-emotional? And keep your focus on the class as a whole, remembering that even though you might be responding to a single student, if you're doing it in a threaded discussion, you're really responding to the entire class, because in that public forum, everyone is able to read it. So keep your focus on the class as a whole, and then adjust your individual responses using this kind of benchmark to guide what's appropriate and what isn't appropriate. If you can keep them from getting frustrated, you're going to prevent a lot of these difficult students from ever becoming difficult. So set your expectations early, try to be consistent, try to be very logical in how you release your course material, and how you reinforce due dates and schedules, and how you post activities. Really ensure that students know where they're at, that they know what's expected of them, and that you're consistent in that facilitation of the course. The more organized and consistent you are, the less frustrated your students will be. And the less frustrated they are, the less difficult they are. So a lot of the difficult students can be traced back to just an emotional reaction to the course. And anything you can do to remove those barriers is going to decrease the difficulties you have with those students. The best book I could point you to on this topic is by Steve Rawson and Susan Coe, and that's Teaching Online, A Practical Guide. They have an entire chapter on how to handle some of these common difficult situations in the online classroom. There's also a lot of online resources available, and I always welcome you to email me or post a comment here if you'd like to continue this discussion.